I am by no means an expert on locked room mysteries, but it's certainly a subgenre of mystery that has always held a special place in my heart. So when I heard about these 3 cases, all of which are genuine mysteries that have never been solved, I couldn't wait to share them with you. If you enjoy this video, please be sure to hit that thumbs up button below and subscribe if you haven't already. And as always, thank you so much for watching. Now let's begin. The first case is that of the death of John Bentley Palmer, who died on June 4th, 1974 in his home in West Sussex, England. It was discovered by his wife Valerie, who called him into the kitchen to ask him where he kept the sugar. This is pretty mundane and ordinary so far, right? But what follows is most certainly not. Mr. Palmer was found slumped over the kitchen table with a single gunshot wound protruding from the back of his head. The gun was still clutched in his hand. There was a second gun on the floor nearby, and there were signs that a struggle had taken place. At the time of the murder, Mrs. Palmer claimed that she had heard a noise in the garden and then discovered her husband dead. Upon inspection of the house, the police found that the back door, which led into the garden, was locked from the inside, and the window nearest to it was closed. A third window in the kitchen was open, but it was on the opposite side of the room and would have required Mr. Palmer to walk past his own dead body in order to get to it. Not only that, but this window was very high up, and there was no furniture or other objects nearby that could have been used to climb it. When they investigated the bedroom, they found that the wardrobe was wide open, but nothing was missing. They also discovered that the phone line had been cut and the curtains had been pulled across the windows. The police eventually concluded that someone had entered the house through the front door, shot Mr. Palmer in the kitchen, and then left via the window. But how? They checked and double-checked to ensure that there was no way anyone could have exited the property without being seen. In fact, they even went so far as to say that no one could have possibly escaped from the house without leaving behind some trace of their presence. The locked room aspect of this case has never been explained, and it remains unsolved to this day. Before we move on to the next case, I want to remind you to go ahead and show your support if you haven't already. Alright, let's continue. The next locked room mystery comes to us from 1897 and takes place at the home of Sir Lambert and Lady Tree in Edgbaston, Birmingham, England. It was the evening of May 2nd, and the couple had just finished dinner when they were joined in their dining room by 2 visitors, Harry Orchard and George Adams, both of whom were business associates of Sir Lambert. Around 9 p.m., the 4 of them moved to the drawing room where they continued chatting and having drinks. At around 9:40 p.m., the servants were called in to dinner, leaving the 4 adults alone in the room. Sometime later, Orchard excused himself to go to the bathroom, which was located off of the main hallway and quite a distance away, returned to the drawing room shortly after and sat down. Then, just a few minutes later, a shot rang out. When the others went to investigate, they found Orchard slumped over in an armchair, a gunshot wound protruding from the top of his head. The gun was still clutched in his hand. At first, it appeared as though the door to the bathroom was locked from the outside, meaning that Orchard must have been trapped in the room with his own dead body. However, upon closer inspection, they found that it was actually unlocked, and there was no sign of forced entry. The police assumed that Orchard must have gone to the bathroom, shot himself, and then somehow managed to crawl back to the drawing room and make it onto the chair without anyone noticing. But there was one small problem with this theory. Dr. Philip Henry, who conducted the autopsy, estimated that Orchard had been dead for anywhere between 15 and 20 minutes before they discovered him. And yet, despite this, there was no trace of blood anywhere in the hallway, on the doors, or on the other side of the room. Nor was there any damage to his clothing or the furniture that could have been caused by a struggle. He basically made it from the bathroom to the drawing room without leaving a single drop of blood behind or making any marks whatsoever. The case of Mr. Palmer seems to follow a similar pattern to that of Orchard. In fact, as far as I can tell, the pattern goes a little something like this. A person is shot once on the top of the head. They are found slumped over either in a chair or at a table, still clutching the gun in their hand. And they are ultimately alone in a room with no apparent way of escape. But there are some key differences here as well. For example, in Orchard's case, the gun was still warm when they discovered him, whereas in Mr. Palmer's case, it was cold to the touch. But this is easily explained by the fact that Mr. Palmer's body was discovered nearly 12 hours after he was shot. According to his wife, she didn't realize he was dead until the following morning because she thought that he had simply passed out and was still breathing. So perhaps the biggest difference between these two cases isn't necessarily the temperature of the gun, but rather the location of the wound. In Mr. Palmer's case, he was shot on the back of the head, whereas in Orchard's case, it was the top of the head. Is this important? Maybe, maybe not. But it is something to consider. As it stands, both of these cases remain officially unsolved. And while the police did come up with theories to explain the seemingly impossible nature of them, neither theory has ever been proven true. The final case we'll be looking at today is that of Cecil William Frederick Parker, who died on November 29, 1923, in his flat above a shoe shop in Porthcawl, Wales, according to Mrs. Minnie Davies, who lived in the flat below. She heard a series of bangs coming from above her apartment. At first, she assumed that they were simply Mr. Parker practicing his target shooting, but then they stopped. When she didn't hear his customary evening song shortly after, she became concerned and went to check on him. She tried knocking on his door, but received no answer. She then tried the handle and found that it was unlocked. When she entered, she discovered the body of Mr. Parker slumped over in an armchair, a single gunshot wound protruding from the top of his head. The police soon arrived and discovered that the room was completely locked from the inside. It was until they brought in an expert to test the locks that they were able to gain entry. According to Detective Sergeant James Sims, Mr. Parker was lying in an upright position in the chair, practically as though he had just been reading, and the gun was still clutched in his right hand. An inspection of the room revealed no signs of forced entry, struggle, or foul play. The bullet had been fired from close range, likely while the gun was resting in Mr. Parker's hand. There was no doubt that this was a case of suicide. But how could he have possibly locked the room from the inside and then shot himself? Upon inspecting the chair more closely, the police found a small indentation where Mr. Parker's shoulder had rested, which suggested that he must have shot himself while leaning against the armrest. But if that was the case, why was the gun still in his hand? Hadn't it fallen out of his now lifeless grasp? Well, yes, it should have. As it turned out, though, the gun in question was a Webley revolver, and revolvers are unique in that the trigger guard doubles as a catch for the cylinder. So when Mr. Parker pulled the trigger, the gun remained closed and locked. Once the bullet was fired, his finger would have naturally slipped out of the trigger guard, allowing the cylinder to spin and the gun to fall open. But since he was already dead, he obviously didn't do this himself. Rather, gravity did it for him. This is essentially the only possible explanation for this case. It's a solution that was confirmed by firearm experts decades later. So why does it belong on a list of unsolvable locked room mysteries? Well, it doesn't. And I'd probably take it out if I could. But unfortunately, I found this case in a book titled The Encyclopedia of Unsolved Crimes, and the author included it in this section. So that's why it's here. And if you happen to know of any other genuinely mysterious cases that fit the locked room trope, I'd love to hear about them in the comments.